Hazel and I have been talking about what happens beyond Lasagne. You know how people turn up at your door with ready meals and food and support and biscuits.
It's like Tetris in the freezer of lasagna, isn't it?
But beyond Lasagne, what is there? What happens? And people always say to you, you need to learn to live with your grief. You need to learn to live with it. You need to learn to carry it. And people that maybe haven't been there or understand, who maybe are still turning up with Lasagne. And actually, I realised that it's kind of the other way around for me, in that I've realised that grief has taught me how to live. It's only through losing Rob that I've realised, God, life is short and fragile, and you just don't know what's around the corner. And I want to make sure that I'm living my best life.
Welcome to Season 4 of the Widow podcast. I'm Karen Sutton, the Widow Coach, and I'll be supporting you through the loss of your life partner so you can find a more positive way through your grief. Whether this is your first episode or you've been with me for a while, I want you to know you are capable of creating something meaningful after loss. And you don't have to do it alone. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Widow podcast. Today I have got two lovely ladies, Phillipa and Hazel, from Music to Die For. I have heard about Hazel and Phillipa over the last couple of years. I feel like it is. I don't know how long you guys have actually been going. And I've kept meaning to have conversations and to connect. And finally, we have got round to coming together and sharing the beautiful work that they are doing. I think what sort of prompted me this time here and now was off the back of a session that we did in our membership. About 4 weeks ago or so now, I was just telling Hazel and Phillipa before we started recording that every now and then in the membership, I host a music night where we all come together virtually online and share and listen to our songs that are meaningful to us with our person in some way. So maybe that's from a memory, a loved band, a wedding song, a funeral song, a song that you found after your person died that the words have just connected and inspired and supported you. And it's really helped me to see actually the power of music and the impact it can have on us in our grieving journeys. And I thought, who better to talk about this with than Phillipa and Hazel and the work that they are doing, which is just so beautiful. So welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us all today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's lovely to be here.
So I'd love to just start, so that we can all get to know you guys a little bit, and just hear a little bit about your stories and who you are. And then we can sort of get to how you guys met and what led you on to creating Music to Die For. So Phillipa, let's start with you, lovely. Can you share a little bit about your story and sort of what brought you to this point?
So a shortened version. I've been involved in music all of my life. I studied music and ended up being a music teacher in Liverpool in a big high school. And then after about 4 years, I escaped teaching and started working within sort of arts and community, music and community settings, with orchestras and opera houses and venues around the country. And then I landed in Suffolk about 25 years ago and started on a job that involved taking music into different community settings. So I've been trying to work out how music can be useful in people's lives, whether that's in care homes, schools, prisons, in the community more broadly. So it's always been in my life and one of my biggest passions. And then 4.5 years ago, very suddenly, my husband died with a brain tumour. And I was in a big job. He just died. I had 2 kids who were about to do GCSEs and A-levels. And I thought, I can't do this massive job and support them and try and work out which way up I am. So I left that job and took the plunge and just thought, I'm going to have a gap year maybe, which is still going on 4 years later. And I decided to just kind of see where things took me. we can talk maybe later about how music sort of showed up in my life after Rob died, but it disappeared completely. And so I decided just to kind of let that happen and see where I went.
Yeah, bless you. Very, it's crazy, isn't it? Because, and we'll come on to it, but you say there about how music is such a huge part of your life, but actually after Rob died, it was a really hard
Mm.
place for you to go to. And I know there's a lot of widows that feel that way about music.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems to go one way or the other. It's something that people really lean towards and find supportive and helpful in some way, or they just can't go there because it's too
Yeah.
painful and it's too much.
Yeah, and I think it went both ways for me. It was about 6 months of just no music. And now it's gone totally the other way, in that without music in my life, I don't think I'd be standing up. But music in a very different way from before.
Wow, it's interesting, isn't it? How it changes. Everything
Mm.
changes, doesn't it? So much. Thank you, Philippa. Hazel, let's hear
So
your
I
story.
am a clinical psychologist, and that's what I trained in. And I have also always had a really kind of strong connection to music in my life. I was that person at school that was making everyone mixtapes, and then when we could burn CDs, I was making everyone, mix CDs for Christmas. And I just have always loved this idea that music sort of soundtracks our lives. And I have like journals full of this lyrics from artists and songs that I loved at different points. And I really kind of noticed that I punctuated my life with different pieces of music. And that, to me, it had always been a sort of hobby, but just a deep passion for kind of uncovering new music, finding new bands to listen to. And so I suppose last year, what really happened that was so exciting was I got invited to be part of a think tank that Britain Peers Arts were hosting, that was about music and also about grief and loss. So, two areas from my kind of professional life that I was really interested in. I'd worked in palliative care for a while. I'd really been thinking a lot about the ways in which we can support people using sort of tools from psychology. And then we had this great other part that I'd never really got to dig into, which was about the music side of it. And I just came away from the think tank. I mean, obviously, this is where I met Philippa, but also where I just really noticed my whole kind of being come to life with this. These are two things I really care, and I've never put them together before, but now we can. And so, I think that's really where the seed of the idea was formed. And also where Philippa and I met and started just exploring what this might look like. And we knew there was something in there that was feeling important about the role music plays in supporting us with grief and loss. But we didn't quite know at that point what it looked like.
So is that where you met then, at this think tank?
Yeah, last.
Amazing. When you first met, was there that just immediate connection between you both?
There was 12 people in this room, and they were palliative care doctors, coaches, musicians, composers, psychologists, music therapists. So I think there was a very strong connection with everyone, in just like we were all there for 2 days. It was really intense, but definitely also the way that it was facilitated was so beautiful that I think very quickly you felt like you got to know the other people. And through that and some of Philippa's answers, I just, yeah, we ended up kind of really connecting over the ways that perhaps we understood some of this.
One of the things we were asked to do, it was facilitated by this incredible woman called Catherine Zesserson, who I'd worked with before. And she creates a very safe, beautiful, warm space within minutes of meeting each other. And one of the things she's asked us to do by the end of the first day was to share a story about a piece of music so that we could all hear a bit more about each other. And we did that after an evening meal, all sitting together on comfy sofas and chairs. And that's when everyone starts crying and laughing and having those kind of moments of really opening up. And it was actually at the end of day 2, one of the people that was there was Dr. Catherine Mannix, palliative care, unbelievable consultant, kind of super guru woman. And she said at the very end of the second day, please, can we do that thing that kids do, and that if you feel like you've connected with someone over these 2 days, tell them. Don't just walk away and go, oh, I wish I'd said something. Just reach out and tell them, can I be your friend? So Hazel and I kind of made a beeline for each other and said, do you want to be friends? Should we go on a walk? And that's how we kind of started talking, really.
I love that. That's so lovely. Just that joint love and passion that you both hold. I'm intrigued though. I'd love to know if you remember, Philippa, what was your song and in your story that you shared on that night?
I do remember, and it gives me goosebumps every time I think about it. It wasn't a song, it was a piece of classical music, and it was Elgar Nimrod from the Enigma Variations. And I think it was probably the first time I'd ever really told this story, but we were in this very safe group. And it connects back to Rob in that it was his most favourite piece of music in the world. He loved that kind of pomp and ceremony. He was military, and so he loved the kind of the scale and the sound and the emotion of it. So it's always been a quite special piece that I couldn't really listen to. Um, and the year before he died, he was asked to um, read the citation at the beginning of the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall. So me and my daughter went and we sat and watched him in his all his glad rags kind of parade in with the torch of remembrance, and then in his very thick Warrington accent read the citation, which no one could really understand because it was such a thick accent. Um, and then then we had COVID. The year after that, I was then invited back to be one of the bereaved families as part of the Festival of Remembrance. And at that point, if people haven't watched it, basically the whole audience in the Albert Hall stand up. The royal family, the Prime Minister, whoever's there, all the cameras are in your face, and the lights go down, and this kind of path of light goes across the centre of the Albert Hall, where 16 of us walked. And the piece of music they played was Nimrod from the Elgar's Enigma Variations. And I didn't know that was going to happen. As soon as it started, I think I swore quite loudly in my head and then just put my head up high and said, I'm doing this for Rob. And it wasn't until I got out the other end that I just collapsed into tears. So it was kind of like, I don't know what I think about signs and things being sent, but there was definitely a moment of thinking, that's Rob, kind of having the last laugh and making sure what he wants to see me cry in front of thousands of people. An amazing moment. So yeah, that for me has become a really important piece of music, and it keeps showing up in my life in all kinds of weird ways. Since I was at Johannesburg Airport in the toilet, and it started playing in the toilet. So it's one of those
Wow.
following me around the world, and just making me smile every time I hear it now.
That's so beautiful. You know, like you say, sometimes we don't know what we necessarily believe, but I don't know. I kind of like to believe in signs, and that sounds like a really quite a strong one
Yeah.
to me in that moment. Was interestingly, Philippa, was that the moment you sort of were able to start listening to music again off the back of that?
Um, I'd started I'd started listening to it by then. Um, and actually, this is a really interesting conversation that Hazel and I have had around. I'm sure, as you and everyone listening knows, that you go through this process after you lose your person of kind of reorientating yourself and redefining who you are. And I feel like I've kind of slowly built myself back into probably quite a different person because I'm on a different track. If you think of life as this giant compass, I've kind of shifted my true north a bit almost. And what's happened is that for that 6 month period that I couldn't really listen to music, I then started to, but stuff that was part of mine and Rob's life. But now, actually, as I've kind of rebuilt myself, my music library has totally transformed as well and is now full of music from before and music from now. And it's that sense of grieve well, live well. I feel like I've got this sort of library that balances before and after. Um, and I have this much broader more diverse library now that lifts me when I need it to lift me, and it lets me sit in that place when I just need to sit. I don't feel I need to use it to kind of constantly be happy. I need to sit in that space sometimes and put something on that matches that mood. So yeah, much more diverse library now, and it's been really interesting talking to Hazel about that, and kind of almost what's happening in your brain as you go through your grief and work through your loss.
Definitely. And I can totally relate. You know that a lot of the work that I do is based on the sort of strobe and shoot model of grief. The restoring of life, but the remembering of your person. It's that oscillation, the back and forth, isn't it? The grieving fully and the living fully, and allowing yourself time and space for both. It's not an either or situation. It's an and, isn't it? And I've got playlists on my phone. I've got a Simon playlist that when I'm feeling that grief, which is less so now. I'm coming up to 9 years. I don't have those moments so much, but when I do, I have my playlist of songs that just take me to that place where I can release and I can remember and I can grieve the way I need to grieve. And then I've got my power songs, the ones that are like, come on, you've got this, let's go, let's live. And we grow, we evolve, and we learn so much about ourselves, don't we, through these life experiences that come to light. And it's allowing time and space for all of it, isn't it? It's very much a balancing act as we navigate these paths. So that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us, Philippa. That's really beautiful, really beautiful. Hazel, are you happy to share your song?
Oh,
your
so
story?
we didn't, when we were doing this, it wasn't a song and a story. So it was just people sharing their experiences of music and loss. So mine was actually more connected to a book, and a book about music. And we were talking about how music can kind of help to keep us connected to others. And so I had been following Clemency Burton Hill's book called A Year of Wonder, where they talk about a piece of music. She talks about a piece of music every day that you can listen to. So my reflections were a bit different, because they were a bit more about how we can kind of experience different emotions, expand our kind of musical library, as it were, and how I'd started to have this network of people around me who were also following the book and listening to the same piece of music on the same day, and how actually that was a really connecting thing to do when people were going through kind of quite difficult times. It can actually feel very supportive, I found, to have other people kind of listening to a piece of music on the same day, expanding your library together, reflecting on how, what you liked and maybe didn't like about the piece of music, and using that as a kind of format to kind of connect with others. But the idea about a story in a piece of music then kind of came after the Albury event, where Philippa and I started to talk about how powerful that had been when because some people came with one piece of music to talk about. And I think that one of the invitations at the think tank wasn't necessarily to connect it to loss. It was just to talk about a piece of music or how music had shown up in your life. So we had this like rich variety of different stories. And also, as Philippa's already mentioned, like that idea of people that needed silence and actually wanted silence, and how important that could be too. But then when Philippa and I met after the think tank and started talking about it, we were just noticing how some of those conversations, particularly like Philippa's story about Nimrod, meant that we got to learn something about her life so quickly and feel connected to her. And we all, I think we were all in floods of tears that night listening to, some of these stories. But that's not a bad thing, as you know, like that's actually a really healthy thing, to kind of feel those human emotions together. And I think what it did for Philippa and I was open up this idea of what would it be like if we could create a space where people can do that, where people can share their story and their piece of music that matters to them, and how could we create this kind of platform for that. And we started with some really big ideas about what that could look like. And then and we still have massive ideas, by the way, but we whittled down the invitation to something very simple, which has become our kind of music to die for, invitation. And that is, tell us about a piece of music and how it connects you to someone you've lost. And there's a couple of things in there I think it's probably worth noting. One of them is we do say lost, And I know that some people find that quite a difficult word because they feel that we should say died. And we don't say died because we also want to include those who are experiencing a living loss or some other type of loss. And I think that's really important that those people feel that they can share their story too. If you're caring for someone who has dementia and you don't see the person, that you married or that you were with as being the same anymore, you're also going through a process of grieving, and you maybe also yearn for those moments of that person that you knew. And so we wanted to make sure that our invitation was open to those people. And also, we say piece of music because Phillipa is a real stickler for the fact that songs and pieces of music are different. And I'm going to defer to her expertise now because this is important. And I didn't know this beforehand, but it is important, isn't it, Phillipa?
It's one of those things that really gets me, because actually a song is something that's sung, and it has words and it's sung by a singer, whereas a piece of music is all music, including songs. So it's why we called it music to die for, not songs to die for. And it means that the kind of stuff that we're being sent through the stories that we're receiving is everything from, goodness, Perry Como, Frank Sinatra, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Queen, Mozart, Bach, Verdi. I mean, there's a whole plethora of music coming in. And one of the things it makes me giggle, because Hazel quite early on said, "Are we just collating the world's most depressing playlist by doing this project? Is it going to be loads of people sending stuff in that's kind of, you're going to listen to it and just be in that really down space?" But actually, it couldn't be more opposite. And I think what's ended up happening is that it's a collection of pieces of music, including some songs, that are absolutely about celebrating life and remembering moments of somebody we have lost. And in some cases, that might include a piece of music that was played at a funeral, and it might include a piece of music that you danced in the kitchen to when you were cooking together, or something you heard on holiday, or it's that ability that music has to help you time travel to particular moments in your life. And I don't know whether you've all experienced that thing where you hear a piece of music and you're transported straight back to the disco when you were 14, and notice the person on the other side of the room and hoping they ask you to dance and all that sort of stuff. It can absolutely take you back, and you can smell it and feel it and remember it. And so to provide this opportunity to say what piece of music connects you to someone you've lost, it is, as you've just said, it's that duality and the oscillation between joy and sadness, or the happy and the sad memories. And I think probably, I don't know, Hazel, what do you think? But the balance of the music and the stories we're receiving, I would say the majority have some, they're hugely bittersweet, but they have these wonderful, sparkly moments that people are remembering,
Yeah.
that shine through. And it's desperately sad, but so full of joy and love.
I think that idea, that oscillation that you were talking about, Karen, it feels like it shines through in nearly every story that's shared with us. And I'm sure there are some that it is about holding that space for the deepest, saddest experiences, and that music to die for can do that too. There's no kind of prescription as to what this has to be, because that's the whole point. It's an invitation, and people can share the story in the way that they want to. But I would say, echo what Phillipa said, that it is this very kind of bittersweet experience of kind of celebrating life and also acknowledging loss. And gosh, I mean, what a privilege we have to be able to read them. I do feel incredibly grateful to have this role, and to be these kind of keepers of the stories, and to really take care of the stories, and make sure that the people are honored through sharing their stories as well.
That's so beautiful. It's so, music's so emotive, isn't it? In so many ways. But Hazel, sort of Phillipa touched on earlier that what happens to us in grief and how music helps that. From your expertise and knowledge, can you just explain a little bit about sort of maybe how grief does impact us, and how the music can support us in that space?
Yes, so I think we've been exploring a lot of different theories of grief in terms of, how we make sense of what's happening, what this thing is. That's the other thing. It's like it's so, it's so messy, really, isn't it? Grief, and it can manifest itself in so many different ways for us, and the ways that we might experience it can look very different, and yet we sort of cluster it under this, or that's a kind of grief thing. So I think to begin with, that's quite complicated, because it means that we're not really talking about one specific sort of emotion, or we're talking about this kind of cluster of experiences. So if we start with like the emotion part of it, I think what we do understand is it's really helpful for us as humans to be able to express what we're feeling, or to at the very least, to be able to name or notice or acknowledge what we're feeling. And so we call that in psychology like emotional granularity, our ability to be able to accurately label the feelings that we're feeling when we're feeling them. So I think, like you were saying about your playlist that you have for Simon, and how you might go to a particular playlist, you also had this sense when you were describing that, of like it's kind of holding an emotion, or allowing you to express or to feel an emotion. And so music has that really incredible power to be able to kind of match our mood, right? We can go, what do I want to listen to today? And then you pick the song, and it's probably linked to how you're feeling, or linked to how you want to feel, right? So you're like, I am so tired, but I'm going to put on that kitchen banger, and I'm going to dance around, and so I think there's that real part of grief, which is all of the different emotions that we feel, and the benefits potentially of music being able to support us in that when the time is right. And I think it is important to say that Philippa's experiences are not in isolation. Lots of people feel that they can't listen to music. It's too much. It brings forward too much intensity of emotion, or it just feels just incongruent with where you are. You just want nothingness instead of like music and things kind of stimulating. But so I think the first thing is that experience of why we think music can be helpful is maybe because it can support our emotional experiences. But we also understand grief now, perhaps in a few different frameworks. And one of them is that it's a learning process, right? So it's about our brain rewiring to understand our new way of being without this person in our life anymore. And that takes time. It takes a really long time, because we've been so hardwired to know where they are in our lives, to know when they're likely to show up in our lives, to know how long it might take us to get to them, to know how close we feel to them. And so when someone is no longer alive, our brain has to recalibrate and rewire and re-understand something that is so incredibly complicated to understand, because they were just here. I can't believe that they're not here. And I remember reading in Mary Frances O'Connor's book, and she talks a lot about this idea of kind of the rewiring of the brain. How when people say, I can't believe that they're gone, it's actually quite an accurate statement, because our brain is in disbelief of the thing it can't compute, because it's so used to the person being, in this space right now, right here. So I think what we started to explore is this idea that part of the learning process for the brain during grief then is to acknowledge that the person has died, to accept that the person is no longer here and now in time and space, whilst also maintaining this really important thread, which is about our sense of closeness to that person, right? We don't want that part to go. We don't want that love to be undermined in any way. We want to keep that there. That's essential. But we also want to acknowledge that they're no longer here and now. And I think music has this really incredible way of helping us to stay close and accept some of the tasks of grief. And I know that sounds so kind of like, just tick that off like your shopping list. But, the task of grief, one of them is, we learn, is to be able to go, yeah, that person is no longer here. And I've got to rewire my brain. They're not going to come through the door at 5:30. That's not happening. And it is heartbreaking. That's part of what we have to do, right?
It's amazing, and it always amazes me. And, I obviously talk about all this kind of stuff a lot. I've got Mary Frances O'Connor coming on the podcast soon to talk about her books, because she's brilliant, isn't she? And, we talk about her book, The Grieving Brain, and now she's done The Grieving Body. And it's, it just helps us to make sense of grief, doesn't it? Because it just doesn't make sense. Like, we can't make sense of it, and we're desperately trying to. But what I really don't understand is that as human beings, we live and we die, but we seem so ill-equipped as human beings to deal with death. And whilst I fully understand it's attached to love, and yes, I get that concept that you have someone in your life and they're there, and you're hardwired to know who they are. They regulate us. They're our safe. So all of those bodily kind of physiological responses to being in a relationship with somebody, or even just having somebody in your life. I don't necessarily mean just, obviously this is the Widow podcast, but this transfers out into all kinds of loss, doesn't it? But yeah, it does take so long. It takes so long. But yeah, as a society, we have this time frame of like 6-12 months. I mean, for some people, it's like after the funeral. If you're lucky, you get 6 to 12 months from the people around you. But I mean, it takes longer than that. It takes longer than that to adjust and to rewire the brain and to find that sense of safety within yourself and in the world again. And why? I know that nobody can really answer that question. It's kind of who we are, but I just kind of go, why? When we are so amazing as human beings, we are so resourceful, we evolve, we adapt, we grow, we can deal with so much hardship and tragedy in life. We really can. I think we're incredible. And maybe I just expect too much, but it's just that dying is the one certainty in life that we have, but yet it seems to be the one thing that we are most ill-equipped to deal with as human beings, which just kind of baffles my brain, I suppose, because it doesn't make sense, because it's always happened and it will always happen. But that adaptation to living without somebody that you love, oh, it's just so hard, isn't it? It is so hard, and we expect so much of ourselves in that process. But it takes a long time, longer than you want it to, longer than you expect it to. And yes, we're but why do we not know that it takes? Why, as a society as well, do we not understand this, so that when we go into it, we have a better understanding of grief? Big questions, aren't they? And I'm not sure anyone has the answer, but I just don't get it.
One of the things we're hoping might come out as a kind of another part of Music to Die For is actually it as we've already shown, you can learn a lot about somebody really quickly by hearing a story about a piece of music. Within minutes, your listeners all learnt about my husband having a thick Warrington accent, for example. But you learn so much so quickly, and what we're hoping is that it's quite a sort of safe way to start a conversation with somebody who you might need to support, or somebody who has lost somebody, to be able to say, the first thing I do now if somebody tells me they've lost somebody is I say, tell me about them. What was their name? We all want to talk about our person. And as you've just said, well, the funeral's happened now, and let's batten down the hatches and stop supporting you. And Hazel and I have been talking about what happens beyond Lasagne. You know how people turn up at your door with ready meals and food and support and biscuits.
It's like Tetris in the freezer of lasagna, isn't it?
Beyond Lasagne, what is there? What happens? And actually, if this in any small way can provide the opportunity for us to keep talking about them, and in that kind of that way of living well and grieving well, of remembering the here, the now, and the close, as Hazel's just described. And I think to your point, that the biggest thing I've learned from losing Rob actually is about myself and kind of who I am in the world and who I want to be in the world. And I think I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this will resonate with the idea of really, really realizing how fragile life is, and how much you want to grab hold of it when you've been through something like we have, and make the most of every single day, and not in a way where I'm like paragliding off mountains and deep diving and all the rest every day, but just trying to live my best life every day. And then on one of the walks, Hazel and I walk a lot, And on one of the walks, we were talking about how people always say to you, you need to learn to live with your grief. You need to learn to live with it. You need to learn to carry it. And, people that maybe haven't been there or understand, who maybe are still turning up with lasagna, but you need to learn to live with your grief. And actually, I realized that it's kind of the other way around for me, in that I've realized that grief has taught me how to live. It's only through losing Rob that I've realized, God, life is short and fragile, and you just don't know what's around the corner. And I want to make sure that I'm living my best life. And I don't think I'd have learnt that without him. And it's trying to kind of reframe my brain, I suppose, into a place of thinking, I'm devastated that he's not here anymore. But how can I kind of reframe that into, I am so grateful that he was in my life, rather than he's not in my life anymore. And so just trying to kind of think it through a slightly different lens, and realizing how important it is to live my life because he can't live his. And one of the things that gets me the most, I'm just having a rant now, is when people say, "Oh, I hate getting old. Oh, I'm getting old and I'm getting like floppy bits and wrinkles." And I just think it's such a privilege to grow old. And that's what I want to do. I want to grow old as disgracefully as possible.
I love that reframe. I love that reframe of how grief has taught you how to live. I think that's really powerful, actually, because you're right. We're here for such a short time, aren't we? I've recently discovered the book. I haven't read it, but it's titled 4,000 Weeks,
Yeah.
which is apparently the average amount of weeks that we have if we lived until we're 78 or something, which doesn't sound like a lot, does it? And then I think, well, I'm 48, so I haven't got, maybe I've got 1,500 weeks left. And then you go, oh my God, like that's scary. And like, how can you make the time that you have count? And not, I'm not one for living every day like it was your last, because I just don't think that's doable or feasible. But absolutely being more intentional, I think, about the choices that you make, and tapping into more of who you want to be and how you want to feel and what you want life to look like. And it's not an overnight success, right? But I think death, if we can not always be thinking about death, because that, it can take away and overshadow life almost, can't it? And it can cause anxieties. But if you've got the end in mind, and what's something that I really think about is, how do I want to feel when my time comes? When I reflect back over my life, what do I want to be able to say? Do you know? And I don't want to be on my deathbed kind of, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd been a bit braver, or I wish I'd taken that trip. And that really helps me, I think, to just make those intentional choices that make me feel good in life. And whilst that's not every day, it can absolutely, I think, drive the bigger picture and bring you back into the present moment, and remind you that every day is a gift, and it's not one that everyone has. And yes, there's heartache in that, and there are challenges in that we have to navigate. They do keep coming, but learning to live again, I think, is really powerful. So coming back to the music, you've created this space where people are sharing their music, that's meaningful to them, and they're sharing their stories. What does that look like? How are these people connecting? What's the goal, I suppose, and the dream for where you're taking this and what this brings to people?
So at the moment, it's a website, and then our social media channels too. So on Facebook and Instagram, we're Music to Die, and then the number 4. And then on our website, it's www.musictodiefor.co.uk, and not with the number, but the FOR. But hopefully we're getting enough press now that if you just Google something related to us, then we'll pop up. But what we are at the moment is very much just holding space for the stories. And if you want to share, if anyone listening wants to share their story with us, then there is a little bit of a guide if you need it. And I think that's really important to say, because some people are like, well, I do want to share, but I've never done anything like this before. I've never written about a song or, like, where do I start? So one of the things that Philippa and I did quite early on was like sit down and go, okay, where would we start? Like, what would this look like? And let's think about how we might guide people through it and give a few prompts. You don't have to follow them all, but you might find that useful if you feel like, I'd like to give this a go. And I also think it's really important to say it's not for everyone. So if there are people saying, oh, I don't really have a song, I don't really know, that's okay. Like, this is not for everyone, and it's definitely not kind of forcing it down, people's throats to give it a go. It's like, if it sort of resonates, I think, and you're curious. But I would say that I think what is perhaps more general is like reading other people's stories. And you can do that on the website too. And I think that is really powerful, just to go and honor the people who have died and listen to a little snippet of their music and read the person's story and have a moment of perhaps feeling like, oh, I'm not alone in my grief and my experiences, because other people are going through something similar or have been through something similar. Or just to kind of discover some new music. Like Philippa said, there's a whole array of different artists on there. But then if you want to share your own piece of music and a story, you can, there's a form there that you can share it with, and then it comes through to us. And we get very excited, and we look forward to reading them all, and we have a little cry sometimes, and we listen to the pieces of music. And then we share the stories in a variety of ways. So some will go onto our website. Some we use in events. We've just done a festival event, and I don't mean use like we're using your story, but in that kind of, we share it in a different way because we want to perhaps talk about the story. We want a small group to listen to the piece of music. Some we might share, I don't know, in an article that we're writing. And we have been incredibly lucky that Music to Die For has gathered this momentum, and we've had some really lovely articles now written about us in the Times and Rolling Stone and BBC News. And so it feels like it's resonating with the people out there, that they want to, share it more widely.
Well, yeah, and actually, just to pick up on the Times, the really interesting thing with that, they did a double-page spread about Music to Die For, and rather than just explaining what the project is, they asked all of their feature writers to share a piece of music and how it connects them to someone they've lost. So out of all of those writers, for the people that read the Times for years will have been reading stuff written by these people, but would never have really known something about them. And suddenly they leap off the page as humans with story and context through what this article did. But I suppose the only thing to add about what we're thinking now is the sort of main push of the whole idea of Music to Die For is to create a space where people can share and talk about someone they've lost. But through that, we're also now realizing we're sitting on this beautiful amount of human stories. Really beautiful, fantastic, diverse music, diverse stories, things coming in from all over the world. And so we're starting to now pull together some ideas of what we might do with those stories in terms of continuing to celebrate them and continuing that conversation about grief and loss in a way that isn't awkward or difficult. So we've piloted our first retreat. We brought together a small group of people, and we actually something else that I run is called Widowed and Walking. So we invited a small group of people who were part of that group for a weekend in Suffolk in a beautiful setting where we were going to walk, cook together, eat together, and talk and share stories and listen to music. And we had 2 days in this beautiful big old house, all living together, padding around in our slippers and going off in our walking boots. And actually, over those 2 days, this incredible, powerful experience happened of people connecting in a very different way. And over 2 days, you know what it's like this when you run retreats. Over 2 days, you can become so close to a group of strangers. And so that's something that we want to continue to look at, as to how do we make something like that useful in the world. And then there's a few, well, there's quite a lot of quite big ideas that we're working away on. One is that we would love to get to the point where we have a book of 365 stories and pieces of music, and lots of other ideas of how that might develop into some other versions of the same thing.
That's such a beautiful idea, because you mentioned a book earlier, Hazel. I can't remember
Year
what
of
it was
Wonder.
called, around a piece of music a day, A Year of Wonder, which I'm intrigued about. And that just sounds so lovely. And I think to create a grief book that has music, that people can listen to each day, hear a story, and maybe reflect on the music, how it made them feel, because it connects you in, doesn't it? And I think this is one of the hardest things that I notice, with my own journey, but also through coaching other people grieving now, other widows, is that we're so disconnected and we're very in our heads. We're very logical, aren't we, about trying to make sense of everything and trying to understand it all. And, go, oh, I'm being stupid, or this isn't right. And rather than just, dropping into the body, taking those deep breaths, really coming back into, like, how do I feel? How is this sitting in my body? Where is it in my body? What do I need to do with it? And what I've really learned, I've recently done some training to become a master intuitive psychology coach, and a lot of that is about coming into our intuition, into our bodies, our inner wisdom. And there's a lot of somatic work that, that I think really benefits us when we are going through anything big in life, any kind of trauma, loss, grief. But music, I have noticed, has this huge ability and power to bring us into our bodies and to connect with the parts of us that we struggle to connect with, that we maybe suppress, deny, distract ourselves from, push them aside. And music, sometimes I will just sit in a quiet space, and like you were saying earlier, Hazel, you kind of match your mood with the music that you want. And sometimes it's slow and peaceful. Other times it's really emotive. And there are more times when you're feeling a bit more upbeat and you want that power ballad that you can dance to and move your body. But whatever that is, if you just close down your eyes and listen to a piece of music and feel it in your body, and sometimes you feel called to move or release or cry or scream and it's such a release, isn't it? And it really allows us to move that energy, that emotion through us, and give it a release and create space within ourselves, which is something I think we've lost touch of along the way, because we're so in our heads. And I think listening to other people's music and stories can help you explore parts of yourself and your own grief, and connect with parts of you that maybe you've become disconnected from somewhere along the way. And I just think that, hearing you say that that's sort of part of what you want to do, so healing and so beautiful and so connecting. I think it's a wonderful idea. I really do.
That's one of the things we're very aware of, is that grief is a lonely place, but we don't always, when we're in that place, want to be surrounded by physical people in our face telling us to get happy or eat pizza. And actually, if we can help people feel less alone in their grief in a way that they're totally in control of, by sitting quietly and reading stories or listening to music or sharing their own story, although we might not, other than retreats and other events that we might do in the future, this is creating a virtual environment that's safe for people to share, and to connect in a different way, in a way that feels very safe when we feel so lost. And I think there's something about a sense of connection that comes from sharing a story out and then getting a response. And the feedback we've been getting is people saying, "God, I feel connected to this. I feel less alone. I feel like I'm part of something. I feel connected." And that's possible without physically all being in a room together. It is something that can come from being able to say their name and share and read about other people. So yeah, we're very we've, as Hazel said, we feel so privileged to to be in this position and to be the keeper of these beautiful memories.
It's such a beautiful thing. It really is. Because I know as well, you said that you've been granted a creative health residency. What is that, and how does that support your work? I'd love to know. I've seen it, and it's probably me and my ignorance. But yeah, I'd love to know what that is and how that helps.
An arts organisation called Britain Peers Arts, which is based in Suffolk, where we both live, run a huge program, which is where the think tank is where we met. That's part of their program. And one of the things they do is they offer time and space to people who have got an idea that they want to develop. And so we've just come to the end of ours, although it's kind of being extended in a kind of way that we're pushing. But the idea is that they say to you, here's a small pot of money, here's time and space, come and try it out, get it wrong, get it right, test it, tweak it. So we've been able to, over the last year, play really and get things wrong and learn from that. So we've developed a workshop model that we're now delivering in different environments. We're off into St. Elizabeth Hospice on Monday, where we're delivering a session. So this has come from sort of trial and error, and that Britain Peers Arts have given us the space to fail, really. And through failing and getting it wrong, we've built something really strong that we've been able to test. So that's kind of it. The idea is that it gives people like us time and space to trial out something and to test it out on actual people in the world.
Love that. So needed as well, isn't it? It's amazing what's out there, isn't it? When you kind of when you know, like, I've never heard of these things before, and I think when you can find these ways to be supported and to help you in that space, and get things wrong or learning, whichever way you want to look at it. But yeah, we need that time, don't we, to get out there when we're trying something new and starting something out. I'm intrigued, Hazel. Your background as a clinical psychologist, you've ended up in this grief space. Was that so? Is it something that's always interested you? Grief? Is there a path that you chose, or did you find yourself in it?
So I do some other things too. I also have my own company called Think, and I work a lot in the space of kind of mental health and well-being now with organizations, so supporting businesses and schools and helping them to sort of think about well-being, and particularly I would say over the last few years in relation to kind of how we help people to build strong relationships with each other and these kind of core elements of belonging and mattering and creating cultures where people feel that they belong. And I think that does link quite strongly to some of the work that we've been doing it with Music to Die For too, because I think we have this human drive and this human need to want to belong somewhere and to want to feel connected to people. And grief almost becomes like the opposite of those experiences, right? It's like suddenly I'm disconnected. I don't know where I belong in the world. I had this thing and now this is gone and I've lost this relationship, attachment. So relationships and attachment have always been kind of, I suppose, part of my interest and where I've worked kind of clinically. And then grief, I think, came into my own life in my early 20s. One of my closest friends died. And I was at that time working in palliative care in Addenbrooke's in my final year as doing my doctorate. And it was like I had this like grief, loss, clinical, theoretical, personal explosion, in that 1 year that I wasn't anticipating. We didn't know that he was poorly. It happened very suddenly. And I think from then on, like that was a kind of formative, I suppose, experience of grief for me, losing a really close friend, at that time of my life. And within that friendship group, those relationships became very cemented, and the connections with those people who all went through that experience with him, I think that kind of lasts, right? And so I think understanding of grief has changed. I'm now in my, mid 40s, and it's like I've learned a lot in these kind of 2 decades about what grief is, but I'm still making sense of, I suppose, things that I've been through myself. And I think that's kind of a very natural part of studying psychology. You often go, oh, what's that mean for me? But also, how do I make this help? How do I support others with this? And how do we make use of psychology and what we're learning from psychology? And I think my big passion has been like, how do we bring those like little nuggets that are being researched into the world so we can all make sense of them? And that's kind of been my big mantra with my Think of Alarm and my company, is like my strapline is kind of bringing psychology out of the clinic. I want it to be in everyday life. I want us to kind of go, oh yeah, that's why I'm finding this so hard, because grief is a learning process and my brain is updating, and it's about time and space and closeness. If that theory feels useful, and if it doesn't, then hopefully, you find something that does kind of resonate. But I think this we can take from psychology that can support us.
I love that. It's so true, isn't it? And I think sometimes people are a bit afraid of psychology and going inward and exploring parts of themselves. But actually, I think it can be so enlightening and so freeing when we understand ourselves better and how to build better connections within ourselves, because the relationship that we have with ourselves, I think, is the most important relationship we'll have ever. But we tend to be so horrible to ourselves, right? And we give ourselves such a hard time, and it's like, right, let's build that and make that a nicer place to be. And I think then that ripple effect, then it helps strengthen the relationships with the others around you, the world around you, and just I think makes life richer. But it kind of has this, we look outside of ourselves, right, a lot, don't we, for answers, for solutions to problems. And I think when we can learn to go inward and explore ourselves a little bit and understand ourselves a bit better, I think that's really powerful, and can really change, our reality in a really positive way. So your work is incredible. I love, the connection you two have made, the relationship you have. It seems like you have lots of fun together, out on your walks, laughing, climbing trees, going on this adventure together. And what a lovely thing to have found. Do you know? I think just finding people that get you, that are, vibrating on that same sort of energy field, and you feel safe with and connected to. It's such a gift, and that you found that together, and now you're creating something that sort of brings that out into the wider world, and really making a change and creating space for people and their stories and their grief, and the people that they love, for very different reasons. It's amazing. So people can find you on the website. Is that the best place to start, or social media?
Yeah, start with the website, and then you can have a little dive into the other stories as well.
Oh, and is it free for people to share their stories and their music?
Absolutely.
With you?
And freely accessed, and everyone welcome.
I love that. Such a beautiful space. It really is. And Philippa, I know you do the Widowed and Walking group as well, which is based in the UK, obviously. And I think that's a Facebook group, isn't it? If people were wanting to look for some connections there. And just briefly, does that Widowed and Walking, I know you're based down in was it Suffolk, you said, but you have little communities around the UK?
Yeah, it's I think as of this morning there's about over 2,500 members all over the UK. It's called Widowed and Walking UK, and the idea is that anyone who's within the group can set up an event and meet and walk. And most days, most weeks, there's wonderful groups of widows and widowers meeting up around the country and walking together. And then sometimes on top, we organise weekends and longer walks. So a group of us have just battled from Alnwick to Bamburgh Castle up in Northumberland over 2 days, and obviously had to stop at the pub for a meal on the end of the So yeah, it's a wonderful group about supporting people and just walking, being out and talking.
Love that. I love that. You're both doing great work, and it's such a pleasure to meet you and have you come on and share your story and what you're doing with all of us. So thank you both for being here and for sharing. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to the Widow podcast with me, Karen Sutton. If you would like more support, head to karensutton.co.uk or explore the many other episodes for more conversations and support. You can do so much to help you take steps forward towards a brighter future, and I'd love to help you do that.